The house was too quiet when Adrian Stoller walked through the front door at 6:43 in the morning. Not the quiet of sleep, not the kind that settles in when a household is simply at rest. This was different. This was the quiet of absence, of things that used to make noise no longer being there to make it. His keys hit the marble entryway table. The sound echoed. He stood in the hallway for a moment, head still foggy from the night, from Cassandra's perfume that still clung to his shirt collar, from the whiskey he'd let himself have at 2 in the morning because she'd poured it and he hadn't said no. He hadn't said no to a lot of things lately. Rachel? Nothing. He walked toward the kitchen. The coffee pot was cold. The mug she kept on the left hook, the white one with the small chip on the handle she'd never let him throw away, was gone. That was when something shifted behind his sternum. Not guilt. He'd learned to live around guilt. It was something else. Something closer to dread. He took the stairs 2 at a time. Their bedroom door was open. The bed was made. Smoothed and tucked the way Rachel Stoller always made it. Hospital corners, pillows squared, nothing out of place. On her nightstand, her reading lamp was off. Her glass of water, the one she refilled every night before sleep, was gone too. He opened her closet, half empty. He stood there staring at the space where her clothes used to hang. The gaps between his suits looked wrong, like missing teeth. Her side of the bathroom, the lotions, the perfume bottles lined up in order of height, the small framed photo of her mother, she kept tucked beside the mirror. All of it, gone. He picked up his phone and called her. It rang 4 times. Then, "You've reached Rachel Stoller. Leave a message." He sat down on the edge of the bed and didn't move for a long time. 14 months earlier, Rachel Stoller had been the kind of woman people described as composed. Not cold, composed. There was a difference, though most people didn't bother to find it. She was 38, a partner at Devereux and Hall, one of the most respected civil litigation firms in the city. She had built her career from a second-year associate position. With nothing but her own relentlessness and an ability to see 3 moves ahead in any negotiation. She knew how contracts worked. She knew how people lied. She knew how money moved when someone was trying to hide it. She did not know her husband was doing all 3. She and Adrian had been married for 9 years. He was the kind of man who was easy to love in the beginning. Charming without effort, warm in ways that felt genuine, the sort of person who remembered small things. How she took her coffee, what kind of music she liked to drive to, the name of the professor she hated in law school. He had a talent for making the person in front of him feel like the only person in the room. She hadn't understood until much later that this was a skill he practiced on everyone. They had moved into the house on Alderton Lane 6 years ago. 4 bedrooms. A yard with an oak tree that Rachel had liked immediately. Adrian's startup, a logistics software company called Meridian Loop, was starting to grow, and he had insisted they buy something that reflected where they were going, not just where they were. Rachel had agreed. She was always agreeing to things that made him feel larger. She had also, at that point, been the one putting the majority of their shared finances into the household. Meridian Loop was not yet profitable. She was. She hadn't kept track in any resentful way. It was just their arrangement, the thing they'd quietly agreed to without putting it in writing. She earned, he built, and eventually they would both reap what had been planted. She believed that. For a long time, she believed it. The first sign that something was wrong was not a lipstick on a collar or a perfume she didn't recognize. It was a number on a document. She had been reviewing a set of financial filings for a client. A woman going through a contentious divorce, trying to locate assets her husband had moved before the proceedings began. Rachel was good at this work. She had an instinct for the irregular, for the figure that was slightly too round, the transfer that happened on a holiday weekend, the LLC that appeared in filings but had no digital footprint. And then one afternoon in October, she came home late and found a manila envelope on the kitchen counter. Adrian wasn't home. He left for networking dinners 3 or 4 times a week now. She'd stopped asking which clients. Inside the envelope was a document he'd left by mistake, mixed in with some mail she'd brought in from the front step. It was a transfer agreement. A significant sum, more than $200,000, moved from their joint investment account into something called Carver Nichols Holdings, LLC. She turned the paper over in her hands. She had never heard of Carver Nichols Holdings. She set the document back on the counter, smoothed it flat, and poured herself a glass of water. She stood at the sink and looked out at the backyard. The oak tree was losing its leaves. A single branch moved in the wind. She did not call Adrian. She did not text him. She sat down at her laptop and started searching. Rachel was not the kind of woman who panicked. Panic was inefficient. Panic was what the other side wanted you to do, so you made mistakes. What she found over the following 3 weeks, working quietly at her desk in the hours after Adrian went to sleep, was this. Carver Nichols Holdings had been incorporated 9 months ago. The registered agent was a man named Douglas Carver, an attorney in a suburb 40 minutes north of the city. The second member of the LLC, whose name appeared on the formation documents as a minority interest holder, was Cassandra Wren. Rachel looked at that name for a long time. She typed it into a search engine, then into LinkedIn, then into the guest list database for a fundraiser gala that Meridian Loop had sponsored 6 months ago, a document she'd pulled from Adrian's email when she realized she still had access to his cloud backup from when they'd shared an Apple ID years ago and never disconnected it. Cassandra Wren, 29, worked in brand partnerships, listed as a collaborator on 2 of Meridian Loop's social media campaigns. Rachel closed the laptop. She stared at the ceiling. Then she opened it again. She was not going to make this emotional. Emotion was for after. Right now, she needed to understand the full shape of what she was looking at. What she was looking at, she came to understand over the following weeks, was this. Adrian had been funneling money from their shared accounts, slowly, in increments designed not to trigger automatic alerts, into Carver Nichols Holdings. The LLC held 2 assets, a condominium in a neighboring city that had been purchased 4 months ago, and a brokerage account that was accumulating what appeared to be a secondary retirement fund. Neither asset was in Rachel's name. Neither asset had been disclosed to her. He was building an exit. He had been doing it for almost a year. The second thing she did, after the research, was call her colleague Mira Fontaine. Mira was a family law attorney who shared a floor with Rachel's firm. They had lunch together most Thursdays, and Mira had a habit of speaking in complete paragraphs, of laying out scenarios the way a chess player describes board positions, methodically, without sentiment. Rachel respected her enormously. She called Mira on a Thursday morning, 15 minutes before their usual lunch, and said, "I need 20 minutes before we eat." Professional, not personal. Mira had looked at her over the rim of her glasses when Rachel laid the documents out on the table. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "How long have you known?" 3 weeks, Rachel said. "And he doesn't know you know?" "No." Mira nodded slowly. She picked up one of the pages, the LLC formation document, and studied it. "You haven't confronted him." "I'm not going to," Rachel said. "Not yet." Mira set the paper down. "Smart," she said simply. They ordered lunch. They talked through strategy the way they talked through everything. Methodically, practically, without drama. By the time the check came, Rachel had a list in her head. What she needed to document, what she needed to protect, what she needed to do before Adrian realized that the woman he had underestimated for 9 years had already seen the entire board. The weeks that followed required a kind of discipline Rachel had not known she possessed. She came home to Adrian in the evenings and made dinner or ordered in and asked about his day. Listened to him talk about Meridian Loop's growth projections. She watched him lie to her with an ease that should have horrified her. She wondered how long he had been this person, or whether this had always been who he was, and she had simply been looking at something else. She did not let herself cry about it. Not yet. She filed the grief away in the same internal drawer where she kept everything that needed to wait. Evidence she couldn't use yet, motions she wasn't ready to file. She moved things quietly. Her personal savings account, the one in her name alone, had a new sum in it. Funds transferred legally from a discretionary account she'd maintained since before the marriage, and which she confirmed, with Mira's help, was protected as separate property under state law. She made copies of every financial document she could access. She cataloged the assets she knew about and cross-referenced them against what the LLC filings suggested. She was careful not to touch anything that would alert him. She did not close joint accounts. She did not take anything that wasn't hers to take. She simply prepared. She also, very quietly, spoke with the partners at Devereux and Hall and arranged for her equity distribution to route to a new account for the next 2 quarters. A paperwork update, she told the administrative partner. Routine. None of it was routine. The moment she almost broke was a Tuesday evening in December. Adrian had come home from a client dinner at 10:30, smelling faintly of something floral that wasn't any of the fragrances Rachel owned. He kissed her on the cheek in the kitchen and asked if there was anything to eat. She heated up leftovers and watched him eat them at the counter, scrolling his phone, and she thought, "I have spent 9 years building something with you, and you have been quietly burning it down for almost one of them." She thought about all the things she had deferred so that Meridian Loop could grow. The partnership track she had prioritized over the offer from a New York firm that would have tripled her visibility. The vacations she had skipped. The evenings she had worked late so she could cover what they needed covered during the period when the company wasn't profitable yet. She had believed in him. That was the part that made the grief thick and hard to carry. Not the betrayal exactly, but the waste of it. All that faith directed at someone who had been planning, the whole time, to leave her with nothing. She said goodnight and went to bed and lay in the dark until she heard him come up the stairs, and then she closed her eyes and kept her breathing even. And she did not cry. She saved that for the shower, where the sound wouldn't carry. In January, she was ready. She had retained an attorney, not Mira, whose friendship she needed to keep clean of conflict, but a woman named Paulette Greer, who specialized in high-asset divorce and had a reputation for being, as one opposing counsel had once said on record, aggressively thorough. Paulette had reviewed everything Rachel brought her and had looked up from the documents with an expression of calm, professional appreciation. "He didn't think you'd look," Paulette said. "No," Rachel agreed. That was his mistake. The plan was straightforward in its architecture, though the execution required precision. Rachel would file on a Monday, giving Adrian a weekend without suspicion, keeping the normal rhythms of their household intact through Sunday night. On Sunday, after he left for what she knew was time he spent with Cassandra Wren at the condo in Fairfield, she would take what was hers, leave what was his, and be gone by the time he returned. Paulette had filed a motion for temporary restraining order on the Carver-Nichols assets, which would be served simultaneously with the divorce papers. By the time Adrian understood what was happening, he would not be able to touch the condo, the brokerage account, or the holdings in the LLC without risking contempt. Rachel did not tell him any of this. She made Sunday dinner the night before because she was still herself, still a person who cooked on Sunday evenings. She made the chicken dish he liked, with the lemon and capers. She set the table. She watched him eat and talk and laugh at something on his phone, and she thought, "Tomorrow, you will understand what it looks like when you underestimate someone." She was at her sister's house in Briarwood by 9 o'clock Sunday night. Her sister, Patricia Dean, had known for 3 weeks. Rachel had told her the same way she told Mira. Facts first, strategy second, no collapsing allowed until later. Patricia had cried anyway, enough for both of them, and then she had helped Rachel bring in the boxes and had made them both tea and had not said anything unhelpful. "Are you scared?" Patricia asked that night, sitting on the couch. Rachel thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "I'm tired, but I'm not scared." She slept 8 hours, better than she had slept in months. Adrian called her 17 times on Monday morning. She let Paulette's office handle it from there. The look on his face when the process server arrived at Meridian Loop's offices. This, Rachel learned about later, from a mutual friend who happened to be in the lobby, was described as blank. Just blank. Like a man who had opened a door expecting a familiar room and found nothing but open air. He hired an attorney within the hour. A man named Garrett Whitson, who had a reputation for aggressive counter-tactics and a client list full of wealthy men who believed the best defense was to make everything as expensive and exhausting as possible for the other side. He filed a counter-petition within 2 weeks, disputing the characterization of the Carver-Nichols assets, arguing that the LLC had been formed with Adrian's separate funds. Premarital assets, he claimed, that Rachel had no claim to. Rachel read the counterfiling in Paulette's office and almost smiled. She had his bank records. She had the transfer history going back to the joint account they'd opened in the first year of their marriage. She had the time-stamped documents, the wire confirmations, the account statements showing exactly which funds had moved, where and when. She had everything. Cassandra Wren did not stay quiet. This was the part Rachel had not entirely anticipated. Not because she doubted it would happen, but because she'd assumed it would be Adrian managing Cassandra, smoothing things over, keeping her from doing anything that would complicate his legal position. What she had not accounted for was that Cassandra was not, in fact, being managed. She called Rachel 3 times in the second week of February. Rachel did not answer. On the third call, Cassandra left a voicemail that Rachel's attorney transcribed and added to the file. A rambling, defensive message that tried to reframe the relationship with Adrian as something Rachel had driven him toward. Her work schedule, her coldness, her failure to be present. Rachel listened to the voicemail once in Paulette's office with Paulette present. When it ended, Paulette looked at her. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine," Rachel said. And then, more honestly, "She sounds frightened." Paulette nodded. "She should be. She's a named member of an LLC that's about to be heavily scrutinized in discovery." Rachel had not thought about Cassandra with hatred. She had thought about her, mostly, as a variable. A person whose choices had intersected with her own life in a way that was damaging, but whose inner life was not Rachel's concern. What Cassandra had done was wrong. It was also beside the point. The point was the money. The point was the 9 years. The point was what Rachel had been owed and what she intended to recover. Discovery was, as Paulette had predicted, the moment everything shifted. Garrett Whitson had constructed Adrian's defense around the idea that the Carver-Nichols funds were separate property. What he had not adequately prepared for was the depth of documentation Rachel had assembled, or the fact that Paulette had subpoenaed Meridian Loop's internal financial records, which showed not just the LLC transfers but a secondary pattern, a series of payments categorized in the company's books as contractor fees that had been made to an account in Cassandra Wren's name over the preceding 14 months. The payments totaled just under $80,000. The work product associated with those contractor fees was, to put it plainly, minimal. Adrian's attorney filed 2 motions to suppress. Both were denied. Rachel was not in the courtroom for the deposition that broke the case open. She was in her office, working, because she had a client who needed her, and because sitting in a room watching Adrian try to explain himself seemed like a poor use of her time. Paulette called her afterward. "He can't account for the transfers," Paulette said. "I know. His attorney is going to want to negotiate. I expected that. What are your terms?" Rachel had thought about this for a long time, not with bitterness, with clarity. "The house," she said. "My full equity in Meridian Loop for the period of my financial contribution, calculated at current valuation. The Carver-Nichols assets, which are marital property regardless of what he filed. My legal fees. And I want it in writing that he waives any future claim against my personal earnings or professional equity." A pause on the other end of the line. "That's everything," Paulette said. "Yes," Rachel said, "it is." The settlement was reached on a Thursday in March. Rachel was at the conference table across from Adrian for the first time since she'd left. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well in months, which was accurate. His attorney sat beside him, jaw set. Paulette was next to Rachel, unhurried. Adrian looked at her at one point during the review of the settlement terms. She couldn't read his expression exactly. It was somewhere between something she might once have called remorse and something that looked more like the particular shock of a person who had been very certain they were the smartest person in the arrangement. She looked back at him calmly. She thought about the oak tree in the backyard, about the mug with the chipped handle, about the version of herself who had put money into this marriage and this household and this man's business without keeping score, because she had believed in something. That version of herself had not been foolish. She had simply been working with incomplete information. She had the complete information now. She signed the settlement documents at 4:17 in the afternoon. Paulette shook her hand in the elevator. Outside, the light was the thin, bright gold of early spring, and the air smelled like something opening up. Rachel walked to her car, sat down, and finally let herself cry. Just for a few minutes, in the parking garage where no one could see. Not from grief exactly. Something more complicated than that. The kind of crying that happens when something has been held for a very long time and the holding is finally over. She wiped her face. She started the car. She had a brief to finish by Friday. The Meridian Loop valuation came back in late April. The number was higher than even Rachel's estimates. Because the company had closed a major partnership deal in February, the week after Adrian had been served, actually, which Paulette had found quietly ironic. And the timing meant Rachel's equity stake was calculated at peak value. Adrian's attorney had tried to argue that the February deal should be excluded. The argument had not been successful. The house sold in May. Rachel didn't buy another one right away. She rented an apartment downtown, close to the office, with high ceilings and a small balcony that faced west. She bought a new mug, no chip in the handle, and put it on the left hook in the new kitchen, and it looked right there. Cassandra Wren and Adrian had, by all accounts, stopped seeing each other sometime around the deposition. This was the thing about arrangements built on a shared secret, Rachel reflected. When the secret became a liability, everything built around it tended to collapse. She did not know what had happened between them after the settlement, and she found she did not particularly need to. Patricia called her on a Saturday morning in June, a warm morning, the kind that made the city feel generous. "How are you?" her sister asked, the real version of the question. Rachel was standing on her balcony with her coffee, watching the street below. A man was walking a large, unhurried dog. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing music from an open window. "I'm good," Rachel said. It was the truest thing she'd said in a long time. Patricia made a sound that was somewhere between relieved and pleased. "What are you doing today?" "I'm going to finish the Baxter brief," Rachel said. "And then I'm going to have lunch outside." "That sounds exactly like you." "Yes," Rachel said. "It does." She refilled her coffee and went inside, and sat down at her desk and opened the brief and got to work.